something interesting I learned from Nolan about the responsibility of a director is the need to guide an actor's performance. One of the best scenes in the incredible space adventure Interstellar, in the scene there's a moment when Cooper and Brand, who are the astronauts, return to the space station from a water planet, a planet where the gravitational relationship to the black hole near it actually ends up affecting its time, making 1 hour there equal to 7 years back on Earth. And their failure to return quickly results in the passing of 23 Earth years. And obviously this prompts Cooper to immediately visit the room where the astronauts can watch video messages sent to them from their loved ones still on Earth. And in the scene, we see Cooper sit through video messages from his son spanning over those 23 years and watch a very emotional father coming to terms with the lost time. And as the book notes, this is actually a very large looming enemy of many of Nolan's films, time. And it's important to take a moment here to acknowledge this theme, for time steals people away in Nolan's films. In the book, he observes, time is a very emotional issue when you're younger. The young are very nostalgic because they're changing so quickly. Your friends, the people you knew when you were 11 or 12, you have a totally different relationship with them. Everyone's going all kind of ways. Things change so fast, so quickly. I think that when you're in your 20s or 30s, time evens out and you're able to look at it a bit more objectively, a bit more logically. Then, in middle age, it comes back to that obsession with the emotional aspects of time passing, how trapped we are by that. Time is something that we can't really understand, but we feel it. We have a very strong sense of time. It affects us greatly, but we don't know what it is. It's these kind of observations that I think give Nolan's films depth. But as we'll learn, it's also what anchors his directions to his actors. Christopher Nolan talks about directing this powerful scene that involves a father having to experience time having robbed him of his kids growing up. He speaks here on having to evaluate and direct the degree of emotion displayed during the performance that conveys this, and this is so fascinating. He says, I talked to Matthew McConaughey, who plays Cooper, about it a lot, and the way he wanted to do it was we filmed all of the messages in advance. I didn't want to use visual effects to put them in, but what he wanted to do was to not see them until he shot the scene and started his close-up. What he was doing was right on the edge of being too real, because he was experiencing it in a very real way as a father, and I think one of the takes might have actually been beyond it. It's this next part that I love. He says, it's one of the great fascinations I have with acting. I sit there and I watch them eye to eye, not on the monitor, just glancing at the monitor for framing, because it's my job to try and experience it as an audience member, to try and be open to what they're feeling. And there's often a point where they're so raw, so open, that you actually disconnect from them because it's too overwhelming. It's too much, and you feel that you're intruding. And so, part of what you do as a director is to gauge when you're really in sync with the audience. This is so fascinating because, we sometimes think of acting in those kind of huge emotional peaks, the sort of things that might win people Oscars, but Nolan notes that too much emotion conveyed in acting is not good, and that there's something for the director to find, a kind of through line, a balance, something emotional but subtle enough that it invites the audience in. And when I hear this, I think of a few different performances, but one that's interesting is probably that of Ryan Gosling's. Not that he features in any of Christopher Nolan's films, but he's an underrated actor who often is overlooked, perhaps because he's a bit more goofy in his persona in interviews. But watch him in films like First Man or The Place Beyond the Pines, Drive, or even the Blade Runner sequel, and you'll see how he nails this subtle emotionality. It's one that ends up being so inviting and thus relatable that there's actually this hilarious meme of young men who look at these characters portrayed by Ryan Gosling and note how he's playing them on screen. But I love that Christopher Nolan watches his actors' performances with his own eye in order to make the correct evaluation. It's known that on Nolan's sets, there is no video village, the term used for a place where, directors and perhaps producers sit behind a monitor and watch the performance as though it's already recorded, but instead he holds the monitor to his side, using it only to check technicalities, trusting his cinematographer, and instead looks at the performance raw. So a lesson here would be to avoid looking at your work within the frame that makes it appear more perfect than it might be. This means, for example, for writers, opt to write simply on a plain document where your flawed words can't hide in the perfect appearance of your website or Medium page. Or for photographers, try and take interesting photographs and see them as they are, before editing, before color grading. Just try and be striking in the rawest form of your work.